Welcome back to the School of Muscle podcast. Today, Dr. Brandon Roberts joins me, and we're going to discuss low energy availability and maybe some practical implications for people looking to maximize their physique. So I think a good first place to start here, Dr. Roberts, is what is low energy availability? I think a lot of people, have maybe heard this term, but it is kind of a little bit elusive, I feel like. Like some people might just think it's being in a calorie deficit. Some people might think it means you're losing weight, but I think there are some maybe distinctions there. So what is low energy availability?
Yeah, so I think to give some context, this is important because it did kind of come out of nowhere almost in the fitness world. But the place that it originated and really came from was the athlete world. And specifically, you're thinking endurance athletes or athletes who train a lot, do high volume, not really like physique athletes per se. But the problem is that low energy availability is not eating enough for your body to kind of do the normal physiological stuff it needs to do. And so the reason this is so bad in athletes, or endurance athletes mainly, is because they have high volume, and then they also have this kind of physique interest or maybe even pressure, where it's like, hey, you're a runner, or you're a soccer player or whatever. So you need to kind of look a certain way. And then therefore they maybe at a young age, they have this pressure to say, I need to be super lean, but I also need to perform well. And what this does is it essentially results in chronically restricting calories. So think of a forever diet, but like an actual forever diet, to where they can't quite adapt, and they start almost like leaching things from their body. So, from bone is the main problem. You get stress fractures, you get kind of calcium deposits taken out of your bones. And that's kind of the basics of it. So I'll kind of leave it there, see if I answered the question well enough for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely sets things up well. And I would say one kind of interesting part of that is that this is often found in athletes performing a lot of exercise. And to me, it sounds like with low energy availability, there's definitely an exercise component to it, to where I'm not sure if this is part of the strict definition, but it seems like it's very much so related to if you're exercising a lot. Low energy availability is essentially when you're not, fueling sufficiently for that exercise. Is low energy availability specific to kind of exercise, or could it maybe even happen to someone that's not exercising so much?
Yeah, so I think in the context of the literature, it's always based around exercise, where you're just doing it, again, like you said, a ton of exercise. If we think about maybe, I don't know, someone who is low calories and maybe doesn't exercise at all, they probably have low energy availability also. But most of the way at the time it's written and the way it's studied, in my recent Instagram posts and stuff, is around these athletes or adaptations. But it definitely can happen in non-athletes, where it can be an equal problem. And on that side of it, it's often associated or connected with anorexia or body dysmorphia or other kind of diseases, where people just aren't fueling their bodies enough independent of exercise.
Is there a distinction between low energy availability and just being in a calorie deficit, or is maybe being in a calorie deficit just a byproduct of also being low energy availability, or kind of is there a distinction there?
Yeah, so I had my coaches ask me this question. They're like, so what is it someone's dieting? Are they LEA? And I'm like, well, they could be. Most of the time when we diet, I'll say standard practice is 500 calorie deficit a day, 20% somewhere. You don't really go beyond that. Or if you do, it's really not for very long. So LEA is focused around that chronic effect, where if you look at some of the studies, even these short-term 3 to 5 to 7 days, you don't really see the negative effects. It's just when you get into weeks and months of training and not fueling is when you really hit a problem, because your body's like, okay, You're not gonna feed me. So how do I deal with this? And again, it starts pulling from those basal metabolic processes. Now, to go back kind of briefly to the diet aspect, if you have someone in a steep deficit for like 8 to 12 weeks, they could be like, especially if you have to increase your exercise to get that deficit going, they could be LEA. I don't think if like, say you have an overweight client, standard, like slightly just want to lose some fat. I think what you'll actually see is more positive adaptations than the effects associated with LEA. So while they may like technically or mathematically, because it's energy expenditure minus it, or energy intake minus energy expenditure over lean body mass, well, they technically fall below certain thresholds. They're probably not like in an unhealthy state.
Gotcha. And I had Dr. Michael Oxfield on just a couple weeks ago, and he's published some research on low energy availability. And I kind of asked him this same question. His response was very similar. And it's like, technically speaking, in the literature, lower energy availability tends to focus on more of those longer term outcomes. But technically speaking, if you're even in a short term deficit, you probably are in a state of kind of low energy availability, but you're not in that kind of chronic negative health outcome state. So I definitely think that your guys' kind of answers align there. So one other question kind of related to low energy availability is it possible to be in a state of weight maintenance, but also being in a state of low energy availability? As I know that I've had clients in the past to where maybe they're doing a bunch of steps or they're doing a bunch of activity, a bunch of cardio on top of lifting weights, and they're just in the state of like, they can't seem to lose weight, but they also don't feel very good, and they might have amenorrhea, and they're also experiencing some symptoms of maybe low energy availability. So is it possible to be at weight maintenance, but still in this kind of chronic condition of low energy availability?
Yeah, and I think the best place to look at that is, again, kind of at these athletes, for an example, is, if these athletes aren't necessarily losing weight most of the time, right? They're performing, they're like, okay, I can't gain weight because it'll slow me down or it'll affect my performance somehow. So that means that I'm generally maintaining, normal fluctuation, but I'm having those negative effects of like, I don't have that fuel to adapt. I feel like crap. I don't have energy. So I think the short answer is yes. And that's where a lot of clients get stuck there because, dieting is hard. And so if you hit a weight maintenance plateau and you're like, hey, I want to lose 10 more pounds, you really only have a couple knobs you could turn, right? You can either turn the calories down or you can turn the exercise up. And I'm really interested in kind of how the like diet break literature overlaps with the LEA literature, because I think that might be a way to kind of offset some of those physiological adaptations. Nobody's done that. Literally just thought of it like 20 minutes ago. But in the grand scheme of how do we successfully lose weight without getting a lot of the negative effects, that might be an option in the future for somebody to look at. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that in particular for bodybuilders going through contest prep, they're particularly interested in like, how can we go through this 16, 20 week prep without experiencing some of these potentially like significantly I think damaging might be a little bit too hyperbolic, but significantly negative outcomes of being in a deficit for that long and kind of being in this state of not having a lot of available energy. So I think that is particularly interesting. And now kind of with this side of things of you could potentially be at weight maintenance, but still in this kind of low energy availability state, but you could definitely also be at maintenance and, not experiencing low energy availability. It'd just be like perfectly normal. So what are maybe some symptoms that people can look at to know whether they are in a low energy availability state? And, talking to Dr. Oxfield, there wasn't like, I actually not sure if he has his PhD yet, so I might have led that a little bit, but talking to Michael Oxfield, he kind of talked about how there's maybe some potential proxies for you being in a lower energy availability state, but it's a little bit murky on like, okay, yes, you 100% are definitively in it, but maybe what are some symptoms that people can kind of look for to kind of get an idea of whether they are or aren't kind of in this LEA state?
Yeah. So the standard symptoms are like fatigue. I think the biggest indicator is going to be performance. Like if you're not improving performance and you're not necessarily dieting, right? So let's say your weight maintenance, just trying to keep your weight, but your performance isn't improving, you might be in an LEA state. If you couple the fatigue and the lack of performance increase with like, kind of like the hunger aspect of, some people are really in tune with hunger. So like when my training volume goes up, I get hungrier, and that's a cue for like, hey, you need to bump your calories a little bit, because then I'll look on the scale and I'll be like, actually, I'm losing a little weight or kind of maintaining, and that's not the direction I want to go. So you could do like body weight type things. The other one is going to be injuries, which is, kind of sucks because you get injured and then you're done. Or you may have some like nagging type injuries. So if you find yourself not recovering all the way like you normally would, and again, you're at weight maintenance and you're not trying to diet, that could be a good proxy for it. But yeah, it's hard to determine. And what I've found with most people is if you're really in tune with your body and like you've been training for a while and you understand like, hey, this is normal versus this is weird and this has been going on for a long time, maybe I need to reevaluate. That generally helps, and having, a coach helps too, but it's not, the symptoms aren't always occurring in everyone.
Right. And I would say in my experience, there's like a spectrum to where there's some individuals where it's like, man, I feel like they're definitely in the state, and then some to where it's kind of borderline, and it's just kind of like using some of these proxies to decide what you think is best and then making the best decisions from there. As I know one of my clients in the past, when they first came to me, one of the reasons they came to me is because they were in a state of amenorrhea. They were doing a bunch of cardio, a bunch of steps on top of lifting like 6 days a week. And they were also like mostly just maintaining their body weight, but they couldn't seem to make progress, and they're feeling achy all the time. And it's just like, I think that we're in kind of this low energy availability state, but then you also kind of get people that it's maybe not so obvious, and it's a little bit more on kind of the spectrum there. So kind of with that, if someone maybe finds that they are experiencing these symptoms and they have some relative confidence that they might be kind of in this state, what would you kind of recommend they do here? I know this is a super hard question to answer because it depends on their goals and the context and stuff like that. But if they are in this state, is there something that you think they kind of should do to kind of pull themselves out of this a bit?
Yeah, so I want to circle back for 1 second because I probably didn't add, and you did, the amenorrhea is the biggest indicator. Like if you have female athletes who are in like having problems with their menstrual cycle, not guaranteed, but like red flags all over. So now I think I have LEA. What do I do about it? I just take a kind of a moderate approach. So the easiest thing to do with people who love exercising, and that's the most of what I see LEA people is like weekend warriors, like, hey, I'm going to go run, like I'm trying to diet and all this stuff, is I would just increase calories around training first, right? So if it's, hey, I'm going to go expend 1,000 calories on this hike or something, I'm like, okay, for this day, because most of these people are also resistant to calorie increases. So that's the other factor, is like, all right, I want you to eat an extra 500 or 600 calories around your kind of events or training or whatever you're doing. Not like walking, but anything that takes a good amount of energy. So that usually people are okay with that because they're usually like, hey, I'm actually hungrier. They can justify like, hey, I can use these calories. So I'll start there. And if that goes well and it doesn't fix the problem, which usually, takes more than a couple days to do, like a couple elevated calorie days, I'll say, all right, we're going to keep that same tactic. And then we're just going to increase your calories across the board, like 100 or 200 calories a day. Just something like to them that's not even noticeable. And to people who don't track could be hard to do. But it could be just like, hey, eat normal and I'll give them like a snack, like a granola bar or something, and that's very practical too. So that's what I would normally do, to kind of hedge those people who don't eat a lot, or kind of work it in slowly.
Yeah. And I think that makes a ton of sense, and it kind of comes to that answer gives me like, information that like, that's a very practical response. Like, I think a lot of people would be like, yeah, well, if you're in a low state of low energy availability, just increase your calories until you're not. But with a lot of these clients and individuals in this state, the reason they got in this state is because they had a really hard time increasing those calories or bringing down their activity. So I think there is a huge psychological component here of giving them a way to kind of increase their calories or decrease that activity a bit in a more kind of justifiable way. So like you said, adding those calories around their workout when they're already hungry, and they might be thinking like, if I have it around my workout, then maybe that's less bad, which that's not really a good relationship to have in the first place. But this is a step in the right direction, at least towards getting out of that state, and then you can kind of maybe work on some of those other things there. So I think that's really good advice for someone that finds themselves in this state of low energy availability. And we kind of, maybe touched on this a little bit earlier, but are there any good ways to kind of prevent someone from getting in this state in the first place? So maybe for like a lot of people listening to this are probably physique athletes or looking to maximize their physique. So they probably go through dieting phases, gaining phases, and kind of cycle between. So for these individuals that are maybe regularly going into these fat loss phases, is there a good way to kind of prevent this state? And I know that you mentioned earlier that there's not like a ton of research on this, like, diet breaks. Maybe this is a way, but you just thought of this 20 minutes ago. So what do you think? Do you think there are ways that are maybe good to kind of prevent this, or what do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, I think being very strategic in outlining your goals and saying, all right, we want to lose 10 pounds. How do I do that in a way that, again, adjusts my energy expenditure and energy intake to where I just lose enough weight, so that I'm losing a pound a week or something, but I'm not, way low calories where I'm going to run a risk of being LEA. So I think it's setting up your diet, to be maybe conservative at first, and then be a little aggressive on the back end. And that's probably with people who don't have a lot of weight to lose, I would say, kind of caveat it. Now, if you have someone who's like, hey, I want to lose 50 pounds, well, you can be aggressive, because they also have like a lot of adipose tissue, which has energy in it that your body will use to kind of solve some of these physiological problems. And in fact, when we look at literature, it's mostly lean people like that struggle with LEA. It's not, your 30% body fat guy. It's like your 17 or lower, person who wants to like be, we'll call it IG fit all the time, like 10% or lower body fat. That's where you really get into a struggle. So I think having, like you said, periods of, hey, I have a goal of, I want to lose 10 pounds, or I want to gain some muscle, and really kind of periodize my nutrition. I was thinking back to when you said that, and part of the thing we talked about earlier. It's like I had this whole like blog on Medium about periodizing nutrition, and like that's the one way to do it is really think about what your goal is and how to get there effectively and efficiently without, having to go super low calories for a super long time.
And I think that this is something that, while there might not be a lot of necessarily hard scientific evidence for yet, it's something that bodybuilders have been playing around with for a long time throughout their contest preps, trying to do it in a way that just kind of sucks the less. And kind of going about it that way, I think it anecdotally at least provides some strategies for periodizing your nutrition so you run into maybe some symptoms of dieting less, which I would assume would also maybe prevent some of these symptoms of low energy availability and kind of getting into that state. But I think that going into it with some sort of plan, and for a lot of people, maybe they only want to drop, 10, 15 pounds, and you can probably take care of that in, 8, 10 weeks. And in that more acute deficit, you're probably not going to worry as much about running into the state. But I think that for, like you said, for longer term fat loss and for people looking to lose, 30, 40, 50 pounds, it really does make sense at that point to have some sort of strategy of periodizing your nutrition, checking out your article and seeing like good ideas on kind of how to go about that. So I think we've covered what low energy availability is, symptoms of it, strategies to prevent it, what you can do if you have it. So are there any other kind of practical takeaways for someone listening to this, probably someone looking to maximize their physique? Any other practical takeaways surrounding low energy availability that you kind of want to leave them with?
Yeah, so I think something that we maybe didn't touch on directly is like the true like bodybuilders or the true competitors in the physique world. Like you have people who want to look good naked, great. I'm kind of in that phase right now. And then you have people who want to like compete. So when you get into these long deficits and you're getting pretty lean, like my last bodybuilding show, I think I was like DEXA and bod potted at like 5% or something, which is really low. Like most people don't get that low. But I wasn't that low for that long. So I was really only there for like 2 months at the end of my prep when I was digging, probably 6 weeks or less actually. And yes, I was definitely in LEA. I was probably like lower than 20 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass. Like it was, it gets rough, but like I know that sacrifice is coming. I also know that A, I have like a ton of bone mineral density, and B, like I'm not worried about injuries or things. I'm training smarter. And then on the rebound, I'm going to do it, smartly and get back into a positive energy balance fairly quickly. So like I couldn't avoid LEA technically, like it was required for me to compete and like do well. And that's okay too. It's like I didn't do anything, based on the literature that jacked up my metabolism or like really messed me up. It was just, 6 to 8 weeks of LEA, come back out of it. Cool. Good to go.
Gotcha. So to me, it sounds like for more competitive bodybuilders, there is some sort of acceptance there that at some point you do have to dig and it's going to suck and you're going to be in that state of low energy availability. But assuming you have a good plan of recovery afterwards and not staying in that state, as long as it's kind of just like, okay, let's hold our breath, go underwater here for 6 weeks and then come back out, you should not see, a lot of long-term impacts of that. Does that sound fair?
Yeah. I like that analogy, to hold your breath and go underwater. I might borrow that for the future.
So I think I'm actually borrowing that from, I think Mike Israetel. I think I heard him kind of mention that kind of expression. And I think he was referencing like some people will mention getting ready super early for your shows and then, like eating into your show. But his kind of maybe argument against that was that by doing that, you're still going to be super lean for that period of time, even if you are eating in your show. So you still, even if you do want to get ready early, you still don't want to be too early because you're still in that state of super, lean body levels, even if you are eating a bit more. So I think that's what he is referring to there. But I think generally speaking, you don't want to stay super shredded, 5% body fat. That's wild. I've never experienced that, but I did go from like when I was pretty overweight in high school. So I went from like 230 to like 160 over the course of like a year and a half. And like, I was definitely in a state of, potentially low energy availability, was not feeling great. It experienced some symptoms that bodybuilders discuss of thinking about food nonstop and just not great things there. But kind of with that, Dr. Roberts, if someone wants to kind of stay up to date with what you're doing, I know that you produce a lot of kind of great content out there. I've been following you for a long time. So if they want to make sure that they're following you and staying up to date with what you're doing, is there anywhere that they can kind of go to check that out?
Yeah. So I tell people my stuff is fairly scattered about, content wise, but the easiest place to like see the most content, is Instagram. So it's like at brob_21. I took like a year hiatus. I don't know if you noticed that, but like I got super busy and I was like, hey, like first thing that's got to go is the social content. just because like when you cut something that's, can't like take out your coaching, your, all your stuff you're doing that pays the bills. And it's like, well, this is low hanging fruit. So, however, back at it, probably not every single day posting, but like I usually do like a week of content where I'll cover something, and like I did with LEA is, do 7 to 10 posts, cover it, and then move on. I try to link that with, I write for weightology still, so usually the content, it's actually quite beautiful the way I have it set up, where I'll cover all the studies and then like the most recent study. So like for the Oxfeld study, this was like a ramp up to me covering that study, because I was like, hey, I need to refamiliarize myself with the literature before I read this, groundbreaking study. Then it helps immensely for me. So, but it also, other people can see that. So those two places, so Instagram's mainly, weightology, also the chief science officer over at Tailored Coaching Methods. So we do coaching too, mostly gym pop. Like we don't really work a ton with a lot of physique athletes. And then I don't really coach too much anymore. It's more like education stuff. So yeah, that's kind of it. But, I'm always available. People shoot me DMs all the time. Like a lot of times I will create content based on like a question, So it's like, hey, if you have a question about something specific, it might actually turn into like a whole week of content and a blog and all this stuff just because you just like had a question, which I love. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do a similar thing. So I'll create content for our Revive Stronger Instagram, and we have a recurring weekly post that is just a frequently asked question. And that's a great content idea because usually if someone's asking it, multiple people have that question. So I think with that, Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for joining me today. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure my listeners did as well. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.